Marvel comic books always had a great bunch of villains to choose from in the Spider-Man universe. So many great Marvel artists and writers had developed these wonderful characters and written stories and had drawn great images to go along with them, that it was a very easy task to pick those wonderful tales and images that we wanted to make this film based upon.
A few months after we got the initial story, the idea came about, let's introduce the symbiote, let's introduce the black suit, and of course that means only one thing, let's introduce Venom.
Venom has a very unique origin story. How do we tell that story and do justice to the character who's arguably the most popular Marvel character of all time?
Venom is pure, gleeful, delicious evil.
I always think with great power comes great fun.
You know, we didn't want to spend a lot of the movie explaining its origins or where it came from, so it came from outer space. You know, that seemed like that was true to the comics without all the astronaut stuff.
The symbiote famously first appeared in Secret Wars in the Spider-Man comics. And in the comics, it's really usually seen as a slightly expanding, black, oily type substance.
You know, when you make a movie, you can't do exactly with something that looks good in a comic book doesn't necessarily look good on film.
We wanted it to seem like an alien thing, to move in a way that we hadn't seen quite before, but something that wasn't in defiance of its liquid form.
When you look at it in the final version of Spider-Man 3, you're going to see something that's much more alive, that has many more tentacles and pieces to it. And a lot of that came from our illustrator, EJ, who just took that initial concept of the goo and said, okay, how can we push this further?
I mean, the goo was kind of a major thing, you know, and that's a perfect example of how in comics the goo works. But in the real world, you got to feel that it's different and it's a little more vicious.
When we first approached the symbiote alien, everybody brought something to the table in terms of designs and artwork and sculptures even, and jars of different kinds of goo, and we'd take tongue depressors and lift them out and look at them.
It took us quite a bit of time to kind of figure out what goo should look like. And the interesting thing about this movie, just figuring out what goo looks like is not going to cut it. We also needed to figure out how goo moves.
We didn't want it to have a structure like an exoskeleton or bones or anything like that, an internal structure. And yet it had to have form and it had to have movement. So we had to come up with a way to animate it and make it move that satisfied us and that didn't defy its very liquid nature.
So how do you take essentially a black puddle and make it aggressive and make it frightening and bring it to life?
There was an animation of goo crawling on Spidey's arm that was based on one of our concept artists, EJ. He came up with a really beautiful, intricate artwork, and the animators kind of took it to heart and really replicated almost by keyframe. And once we nailed that, everybody kind of collectively just said, hey, this is it. I think across the board, everybody found something in there that was menacing and predator-like enough, but not passive.
It's been a real challenge. The goo has been just in that it's unlike any kind of character personally I've ever worked on, and it's just that in that it doesn't have a shape, and so often we associate the shape of a character with that character. You know, we talk a lot about animals, you know, as far as like cobras, the way they kind of rear up and strike, or scorpion stings, or snakes, how they slither, and we look to the animal kingdom, I think, a little bit there. And believe me, I think every one of the artists around here has a stack of comic books where we're constantly just on our own, just thumbing through and looking to like what the different artists throughout Marvel's history have done.
Venom is a character that most excited us because it is a character that has its origins with Peter. When Peter puts this symbiote on, it begins to take on the imprint and the abilities of Spider-Man.
Once it attaches itself to you, it enhances those kind of more negative or darker qualities of somebody's character.
So yes, it's Spider-Man. He's our hero, but our hero now is being tested.
That black substance is drawn to negativity. And I think when it senses Peter's darkness, his hatred for Flint Marko, his terrible sense of guilt, and his pride, it, like a beacon, brings the stuff toward him.
Sam always saw it as kind of comparable to alcoholism or drug addiction or something, because the black suit gets on him and makes him feel powerful.
Black suited Spidey is is much more aggressive, and he's much stronger, and he's more brutal.